dancing in the city lights.
You should not go out stay at home. Start working from home. Stop non-essential contact. Protect our NHS. Stay at home. And save lives.
Hello, sorry about that. That was me getting a bit trigger happy with the buttons, but a very warm welcome to the Lockdown Diaries. As always, we're live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Periscope, Crowdcast and Twitch. So wherever you are, you should be still able to fire over your questions or just say hello, and we'll see those come through and we can answer them as we get through the show. Photographer Peter Dench was made in England in 1972 on the Feast of St George, the patron saint of England. He shares a birthday with William Shakespeare, arguably the greatest Englishman that has ever lived. For the first 18 years of his life, home was never more than a few minutes' walk from the seaside. From his first breath, sea salt filled his nostrils. The sound of seagulls burst the eardrums, you can tell who's written this, and saturated colours startled the retina. Deck chairs, Punch and Judy arcades and bumper boats. This was his introduction to England. His youth beat a retreat, and he continued to be fired from positions of responsibility by the people he was responsible to. The options reduced to photography. After succeeding at A-level and enrolling for a course at Bournemouth and Poole College of Art and Design, a career making images looked promising. Browsing through the books of Martin Parr, Elliot Erwitt, Paul Rees, Paul Graham and Greg Leach in the college library, he began to take photography seriously as a career. If he could travel the world, make people laugh and think, that was a fine way to live. If you could have a few drinks along the way, that was the life for Dench. And since turning pro in 1998, Dench has had the privilege to work on the assignments in countries across the globe, but it's towards England that he consistently points his lens. It's his home, his passion, and the people he wants to understand most. His journey has taken him from elite public schools to working class holiday camps, from A&E wards to inside alcohol rehabilitation centres. Dench has 3 books published of his photography on the British, and only once in his career has he been punched in the face. He currently continues to live a hand-to-mouth life in central London with his family, and he should be there. It's like one of those Eurovision things. Hello, are you there? Lockdown Dench.
That was brilliantly written, Rick.
Do you like the way that was so natural? Peter, we got there in the end.
Looking in a very odd mirror.
Well, God forbid. Right, Peter, welcome. Thank you for, taking the time out from whatever you've been doing. We're probably going to find out what you've been doing. Do you want to just quickly introduce yourself? I don't know how much you want to extrapolate on that lovely introduction. It was so genuinely written by me.
No, I think that was spot on.
Excellent.
Apart from taking photography as a career seriously.
Yeah, no photographers do that. So the first question I want to ask, actually, more important is how come you've only been punched in the face once?
That's a good first question. You're pulling no punches there, Rick. Why only once? I know it's unusual, isn't it? But I don't think I come across as threatening. I'm quite polite when I'm out working. I don't have any tattoos.
Sorry.
I don't wear any religious insignia. I don't wear any football shirts. So people can't make immediate judgments as to who I am. And I often wear a cardigan, which I think helps disarm people. So I just tend to not say a lot, listen, and then try and embed myself in the situation quite quickly. So I've not, I've only been punched in the face once, and it wasn't strictly due to photography. I was out photographing, but I interrupted a domestic incident in Leeds. So if you've been to Leeds, you'll know that's it's not an uncommon place to get punched in the face. But yeah, I've been quite lucky, and I know the situations that I photograph in quite well. They're quite familiar. So if I do see trouble brewing, I generally know how to sidestep it.
So you've pulled out a few pictures that we're going to look at as we talk. So, and one of them is I don't know if this is a follow up from the punch in the face question here. So your series of shots from alcohol in England, which I've got a few of here, and this is the one that you pulled out when I said illustrate your punch in the face question. So is this the one that is this the domestic, or is this just happens to be a Leeds pub, or what's the story behind this?
This was Rick. I am getting double sound from you, just so you know, but I can hear the questions okay. This wasn't anything to do with it. I think if it had come to blows, I could have taken him. I think he was posturing more than threatening. He sort of came in the pub and he was wearing a camouflage jacket, and he pulled it over his head. So I took a frame. He threw it on the floor. I took a second frame, and then I think this was the third frame. And then after I took this picture, I just put the camera gently on my lap, said something to him. He didn't reply. He picked up his jacket and he kind of exited the room. Ordinarily, I wouldn't include a picture like this in a reportage, because he's staring directly at me. So as a photographer, I'm affecting the scene. But I think there was enough going on in it, and enough relevant information within the picture, the reactions of the different people, that made it work. So I decided that that could stay. I'd been in the pub about 3 hours, so people had got used to me being there, and I didn't know anyone when I walked in. But the chap in the bottom left corner was celebrating his 80th birthday, I think. So I just sort of made sure I sat down with him, had a chat, and kind of got familiar with my surroundings quite quickly. So, it's an interesting moment and a wonderful pub decor, I think.
Yeah, definitely looks like a set on the film. But so the next one, definitely no one was posing for this. What's the connection with the punch? Is this a punch in the face moment, or
this is a rough and tumble moment? I think it's what men do, isn't it? You kind of grapple in a sort of friendly way, and then sometimes it sort of goes a bit too far, and I think this one was just on the cusp of turning from being friendly into something else. But even just looking at these two pictures, I feel my isolation has increased. It'd be nice to be able to get back out there in a month or two and see the British at play again, because there's not much playing going on in North London at the moment.
No, when they're allowed to play.
According to play guidelines.
A question. Actually, someone's come up. We'll put it on screen. Look, we can do fancy things like this, I think. So Jonathan says that must be at the races somewhere. That's a very large block of.
Yes. Yes.
So that's come up so large.
I've kind of been photographing at, Epsom, Ascot, and events of the English summer season since probably 1998. And that was one of the early ones. So that was around 2000, 2002, I think. But as a photographer, I try and sort of freshen up what I see. So every 5 years, I'll make an effort to re-document, what interests me and what I've documented in the past, to see if it's changed significantly, see if I can add to it, and see if I've got anything else to say. But so a lot of my images are culled, harvested, however you want to call it, from horse racing events and sporting events throughout the spring and summer.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you, and it might be a bit cliche, but if you could describe yourself briefly in 3 words, what would that be? What would those 3 words be? It has to be
brief if it's 3 words.
Well, 3 words, but without too much description, because we've got a whole bunch of stuff. I know people want to see your work and hear some stories. So I thought might be quite, to get inside your head a bit. What 3 words would you use to describe yourself?
Yeah, I can't do it. I've tried to answer this question that has been asked several times, and I have 1 word. So seasider.
Okay.
For me, that defines who I am, how I see, why I'm interested in what I photograph. I asked my wife, I said, if she could come up with a word. She just said voyeur. I've progressed to 2 words, and I
a
think
seaside of voyeur. It could be not really 2 words that should be used together, possibly, because it could lead you into all sorts of issues.
Yeah, both of them are fair enough, I think.
So we've got some more images to look at, and you picked these images up after I asked the question, what's the most horrific thing you've ever taken a photo of? And you immediately fired back with 5 images. So I don't know, are these the 5 most horrific things you've taken a photo of that we're about to see?
Well,
or is it just the...
if thinking about it, I think the most horrific picture I've taken is my local pub after lockdown. Well, certainly the saddest thing that I've ever photographed.
So
I'm compelled to walk past it every day. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Horrific. I mean, I don't know. It's this one certainly wouldn't be.
No.
But I guess the collective horror is just seeing what situations the British get themselves into, and this kind of sequence, if you can call it that, I suppose, just kind of clarified the horror of, pretty much sort of weekly behaviour on the streets that I've seen up and down the country and in the A&E wards. I suppose, I'm not sure if this image is coming, but when I spent time photographing someone go through rehab for alcoholism, this image of Pete, who doesn't live too far from me, he was a binge drinker, and a binge for Pete was probably around 5 bottles of wine a day, every day, for 7-8 weeks on the trot. So last time I spoke to him, he was 8 years clean. So I actually find this quite a pleasing image now, an image of optimism and hope. But witnessing him go through that process of rehabilitation, for me, is a constant reminder of, how close we could all be to finding ourselves in the same situation. He's actually being breathalyzed there after I've visited him, so to make sure that I haven't bought any contraband or cans in for him while he's there. So that and car accidents.
Yeah, I mean this next image is I'd say it's fairly horrific and obviously connected with the alcohol thing, right?
Yeah, it's a very, very distressing picture. The chap who was driving the vehicle, he passed away about 2.5 hours later on the operating table, which I witnessed. You'll only see 2 frames from this scene. On both occasions, I've chosen images that don't actually identify him, because obviously, I saw how it happened. But I still think it's an important picture because, I wanted something in the Alcohol in England reportage that highlighted, drink driving, and the paramedic, the rapid response driver who attended the scene, obviously let him go about his job first. And he said, I can smell beer all over him. There's cans of alcohol in the car. So he was confident that, it was an alcohol related accident. Yeah. So that was, I mean, even now I had to actually drive the rapid response vehicle because the rapid response driver had to jump in the back of the ambulance. So he just threw me the keys and said, follow us. So it was about 3 a.m. in Bristol. And I can still hear the kind of siren on the roof of the vehicle that I'm driving at sort of horrendous speed. But yeah,
how did you find yourself in that situation? Were you doing was it a project you were on? Because I'm guessing you just weren't wandering around at 3 a.m. looking for road traffic accidents.
I mean, I'd arranged it all beforehand. So one of the previous pictures of the chap lying in the gutter, that was taken in Plymouth. And one weekend I just decided I'd go to Plymouth because it was the 7th most violent street in terms of alcohol-related incidents. I obviously didn't want to go to the number 1 street. I thought I'd ease myself in with the 7th worst street, which was Union Street in Plymouth. So I went down there on the train and I took one picture, and then I realised that it wasn't a sensible way to go about making photographs. So the following Monday, I phoned Plymouth Police and I arranged to go out with them the following weekend or the weekend after. So after that, I kind of learned that was the sensible way to do it. So I talked to Bristol A&E department and said, look, this is what I'm trying to achieve. You know, can I come out with you? And so I spent 2 nights out photographing with their rapid response unit. And it's a tricky situation because it cost me hundreds of pounds to go there for the weekend. I didn't want to waste my time or my money. I obviously didn't want anyone to get hurt either. So, you know, it's quite early in the discussion, but you know, it's a moral line that we as photographers and photojournalists have to tread, you know, on a daily basis, as to why do I feel this picture is important? Why do I want to release it to the world? Because once it's out with your agency, you know, it can run in this publication or that publication and the headline can change. So you kind of lose a degree of control. So you've got to think quite carefully about why you're putting work, you know, that's accessible out there before you do. And yeah, it's a tough.
Which is actually a nice lead on to sort of the next thing we were discussing is there such a thing as getting too close? Can you be too close to a subject? Can you be too close to an incident? Because I'm going to pull up a picture here, and you know, we can. I don't know if this highlights it or not, but it's certainly an interesting one. So here we go. Let's have a look at this, and bear that. I don't know. I mean, can you? I mean, I guess you can be emotionally close to something, which what you're just talking about with the accident and stuff like that, and which can affect you. But in terms of actually physically getting too close, do you think there's a point where, with your work, it becomes, you know, because obviously part of your work does involve encroaching on people's spaces to a point. But let's say, how about this one?
Well then, yeah, this is shot in a swingers club in Sheffield called Le Chambre, which I'm sure you already knew, Rick. But yeah, I mean, something like this, you know, access, of course, is everything. So this was actually for an assignment for a German news magazine called Stern, and we were looking at love or lust in the UK, how people express it, where it can be found. So we thought a trip to Le Chambre would be a good idea. So we obviously call the event, the sort of organizer, and say, is it okay if I come and photograph? So at the beginning of the evening, I stand on stage and I'm introduced, and the organizer says, this is Pete Dench, you know, he wants to photograph tonight. Who doesn't mind being photographed? And you see a show of hands. And then I obviously follow those people around for the evening and have an idea of who doesn't mind. It was superhero night, Rick. So I went dressed as Spider-Man, but no one else took up the theme for the evening. So I was kind of like wandering around, sort of photographing.
Did you have? You know, was it just a regular Spider-Man outfit, or was it?
It was kind of a t-shirt, kind of leggings combo. So quite, you know, like very early Spider-Man.
Right, yeah.
But I smelt things on the breath of people that evening that I never want to experience again. So I guess in that context, you can get too close. But, you know, I think the closer you are, the more respectful it is as a photographer. You can be more discreet. You know, for 15 years, I only ever shot on 35mm or the equivalent. So I had to be close. But I want to be close enough to be able to smell the person I'm photographing, hear what they're saying if they're talking to me, so I can respond. And I think if you're in it really up close, you know, you're almost quite sort of invisible to them. People have better things to do than worry about being photographed. You know, they just want to get on with their day or enjoy their event. So,
well, he looks like he's enjoying himself on the bench there.
Yeah, he this is probably one of my best known pictures, and after I shot this frame, I do use film flash, so I think there is only one frame of this, possibly two. So when the flash popped, he kind of pulled away from the woman he was kissing, and he jabbed a finger at me and he said, that photograph better never be published. And to date, I think it's been exhibited in over 80 countries worldwide, and was part of the story that picked up a World Press Photo Award in 2003. So, but again, it was a significant event of the English season. I was an accredited member of the press. I had a yellow bib. I took his remarks into consideration, but at the end of it, I thought if he was being indiscreet with someone that he shouldn't, then, at least go on the bus or round the back of the bus. So, and if you notice in that picture, there's a guy being ill behind. And so when the scene cleared, I went and checked why it was pink. And I saw lots of strawberry pips in it. So he'd obviously been sort of necking champagne and drinking strawberries. So I thought it was quite a poignant picture in terms of England's relationship with alcohol. If you have just the right amount, you might get lucky with a partner, or if you have too much, then you're the guy in the background. So I guess the lesson there is to always shoot through a scene. I'll always make sure I'm there at the beginning and I'm there at the end, and I shoot everything in between. And that way I feel as though I've got an honest, visual sort of narrative of what I witnessed.
So there's actually a convenient way to bring in a question here from, I don't know who it is because they've got an anonymous nickname, but it says, due to the nature of your photography, do you follow up with the subjects for permission to use the images?
Good question. No.
Fair enough.
People, I haven't got that discipline to model release everything. So, as long as I'm an accredited member of the press on private property, or I'm photographing in England in a public space, as long as the image is used for editorial purposes, that's fine. If someone wanted to use that image in an ad, then I'd have to locate the people in it. So again, it's up to you as the photographer to judge each situation. People do get in touch with me. 95% of them say, I absolutely love that picture of me. Can I have a copy? And the people who say it's upsetting for them, generally I'll take that on board. And if I think it's the right thing to do, then I'll sort of remove that picture, or sort of I certainly won't release it. So yeah, it's people are welcome to. It's easy now. It's digital because you can follow them on Instagram or exchange information quite quickly. So yeah, I'm always happy to have that conversation with the people that I'm photographing. Excellent. That guy's just downed a pint of Guinness with 2 whiskies in it.
Excellent. Is that all?
At a wedding party in either St Ives or Newquay. I'm not sure.
I actually thought that was you in the background at first when I saw the picture, but I realised that it wasn't.
Yeah.
Excellent. Is that the same wedding party?
No, that's outside Ascot. So
it's Ascot. Okay.
It's quite an important picture actually, because when I moved to London my portfolio was dreadful. It wasn't up to scratch. I hadn't made use of my time at university to produce a decent folio. So I kind of started going to events like where that was shot at Ascot, but you don't always have to go inside. There's enough going on in the public space. So if you can't get a press pass to get in, or you can't afford to buy a ticket, it's still worth going to the train station, transport hubs, around the perimeter, because there's plenty of things going on. So that was just before Royal Ascot, but at a pub, outside the perimeter, So what I'll do on something like this is I'll just try and buy, if I can't get a press pass, I'll buy the cheapest ticket that'll get me inside the venue, and then start to make pictures, that way. So these are quite. That's not social distancing, is it?
No, not anymore.
Before coronavirus, it's brought a new meaning to
pre-CV.
But this, so I always have my camera on display, so I'm not very discreet. So I'll walk over to a group like this, and I'll sort of introduce myself, and then they'll go back to doing what they were doing before I got there, and I'll just hang around and start to make pictures and just see what the reaction is. And usually, I say this a lot, but fear is in the head of the photographer. I think most people in England, for sure, don't mind being photographed. The few that do, you just have to take that on board. So this lady, she always met her friends opposite Royal Ascot Racecourse, for a pre-race drinks. And on this occasion, it was already being occupied by the gentleman in the yellow shorts. But she still sort of insisted on this kind of routine, this tradition that she had, which I thought was very British. So the two of them kind of got quite cozy in there.
That's the back of a pub or something, is it? A little bit of.
That's a nightclub down in Cornwall again. So I shoot quite a lot of shoot images with quite a lot of vacant space, because I'm primarily an editorial photographer. So I know an image like that is, if it's going to be a double page spread, the spine will go down the middle, and then some text can be worked over the red wall. So I'm a very naive photographer, Rick. There's usually a primary colour in most of the things that I shoot. So I'll get excited if I see a woman in a yellow dress, or a blue umbrella, or a red wall, and I'll try and deliberately work with bold colours, to create a successful picture, because we haven't got a lot to work with, have we? Perspective, content, four corners, get three of them right, and you've probably got a half decent picture.
And so, a completely different random question that I thought would be interesting is: have you ever actually shot a wedding as the official photographer? Has that ever been?
Yeah. You wouldn't want me to photograph your wedding,
no.
trust me.
But it'd be interesting.
The first wedding I ever photographed was my form teacher at secondary school, whose name Mr. Stowe. And he was also a science teacher, and I charged him £60, which he thought was too much. But I kind of stuck to my price. I'd probably shoot it for the same amount now. But
I was to say you do it for 50 now. At the moment, take it for a £5.
But what happens with me is people say, "Can you photograph our wedding?" And I say yes, but only if I can photograph it in the way that I want. And they all say, "Oh, yeah, of course." And I can think, okay, great. And then I get there, and it's like, well, Pete, why you're here? You couldn't just do the grannies, and then the grannies and the aunts, and then the uncles.
Only when they're drunk.
So, yeah, and then the ones that I do sort of enjoy taking that, no one ever gets to see. So, I've done weddings. I'll leave that to the capable wedding photographers out there who are struggling during this time. So the last thing they need is me trying to, swap genres.
So we'll pull up what's quite interesting. If we pull up the next set of stuff, which is your English summer season stuff, and then look, the question that I was going to ask you around this point is: do you actually ever fear that you're just going to get into a massive fight, a huge, massive brawl, and you're in the middle of it?
Stop on this picture. So, this was what I was talking about. I'll refresh an idea every 5-10 years. So I kind of revisited the English summer season in 2017 and 2018. It was actually a commission for the Sunday Times magazine, and then the following year for Stern again. And so this picture was published quite widely. And then I had an exhibition of the work, and then I got a call from the guy on the turf asking if he could come along to the exhibition. And he may be lying down, but stood up. He's about 6'7", 6'8". John is his name, and he was actually quite. This picture now hangs in his office or home, so he was actually quite thrilled. Maybe the wrong word, but he was sort of interested to see how he was being represented in the media, and we met up and at his work, and I gave him this as a gift. So
Was this?
sorry.
Was this one here? Is this from the same set? The same?
Yeah. So the reason I kind of wanted to revisit it, because I found it had changed, and so I'll get to your brawl question in a minute, because I grew up in the mid-'80s. Well, I was a teenager in the mid-'80s, so that I saw my fair share of football hooliganism, especially during away days. So brawls I don't fear them. They're a visual spectacle. I don't encourage them. But if one happened, I would stick it out and document it. And what I was finding, being back in these scenes, that now that football hooliganism has pretty much gone from football grounds, it's popping up in other venues or other sort of sporting events. So I've seen an increase in drug use, sniffer dogs, searches, and brawls. I just want to make clear that this guy wasn't in a brawl, and just because he's got a tattoo doesn't mean he's prone to brawling. But at these events, there's usually a bit of fisticuffs at the end of the day between, I don't know, rival football gangs or dealers or whatever, or counties. Yeah, Surrey versus Essex.
People with tattoos on their hand, for example. But you're not implying that they're more likely to end up in. Of course, that would be stereotyping.
Well, stereotypes exist because there's a certain truth, but I think high jinks sometimes boils over, doesn't it? And usually there's a lot of sexual tension involved when it does. So especially at the end of an event, it's the equivalent of when the lights come up and you're faced with the stark reality of how much you've had to drink and what you're supposed to do next.
And this next one is very bizarre. I wasn't sure if it was actually an Arab sheikh getting married or it was a guy in fancy dress. I was unsure as to where that possibly could have been. That kind of grabbed me because I noticed the headdress and the outfit more than first before the guy sitting down reading whatever magazine he's got.
Well, maybe this needs a caption then, because this is at Glyndebourne, where they have an opera festival, and the people in the background are actual cast members, so they're teasing the public as they walk around the grounds. I can't remember the opera that was on. I think it's called Hippa Mistra or something, but I fail to remember who it's by. My opera knowledge isn't great, but yeah, people sort of go there to picnic. It's about £250 a ticket, so quite exclusive. And the day that there's a brawl at Glyndebourne Opera, I will despair, because this is actually quite a civilised and well respected event.
Sure. And this is, I guess we're back at the races now, are we?
Yeah. So I mean, I most of my photos are taken from down low or up high. I'm 6 foot. I try and take myself out of people's eye line. So most of I'd say a majority of my pictures are taken on my haunches, where I'm squatting down and looking up, and then generally people just can talk across at each other. They can keep their own sort of ceremony going, and I feel a bit more freer to observe and sort of pick out the details that I want. Yeah, quite a messy shot this, but there's quite a lot going on in there. There's a lady on a hen do in the background. See, you wouldn't have got that at Ascot or Epsom.
You probably will.
Years ago.
No.
Or maybe you would, but these kind of events are being destinations for stag do's, increasingly so. So, yeah, I do like a downpour.
And
both before and after, that people tend to do sort of strange things.
This is after a downpour.
It is, yeah, just after, but a nice moment, I think. Quite a tender.
Beautiful moment. Is there a post-coital cigarette that she's possibly taking there as well?
And interestingly, I don't want people to think this work is sneering. These are situations that I grew up with. The people generally in the photos are familiar to me. It could have been an aunt, could have been an uncle, and this was the one that the Sunday Times magazine chose as the opener, as a double-page spread. So it's always quite interesting to see, what the sort of publication will choose, what images they kind of gravitate towards.
Do you think that because of your background, and you said that it could be your aunt or you're someone you knew and they're familiar to you, do you find that you feel more comfortable in the situations, that you don't you're not as self-conscious when you're taking the shots because you feel like, not that they're your people, but that you're in a situation which is comfortable and you're confident, whereas if you were to do that with people you didn't know or didn't feel, didn't know in your home zone?
Not really. I rarely feel comfortable photographing anything. It's the act of raising the camera and pointing it at people is still quite difficult. It took me 3 years to point a camera at a stranger, and some days I still find it, quite an effort. Now I've got enough practice that I kind of do it, whatever, or second nature, or I know how to overcome the concerns. But yeah, I rarely feel comfortable, and I prefer it that way because if I feel a little bit edgy or out of sorts or bristled, then I think it drives me to make more interesting pictures.
So
and that was that one. The previous one is what they used on the cover of the Sunday Times magazine.
So is there anything actually that you won't shoot?
Well, your wedding probably. Well, yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I wouldn't shoot if me taking the photograph would put someone else's health or safety in danger, or compromise, something that way. I mean, I don't think there's any particular scene. This question could go horribly wrong. Of course, there are terrible things that I'd like to think that I wouldn't just go through the process of photographing. But I am a photographer. It's not my job to help medically. I'm not medically trained. It's my job to get a cover for the publication that I'm working for, a double-page spread. But obviously, there is a limit to that. So if I was jeopardizing someone else's safety or seeing someone in genuine distress, then I wouldn't photograph that. I'd, get help or help if I could. But he's okay, he's just having
a little chill out with it. And this one that's not perspective there. That is actually a giant bottle of wine, isn't it?
Yeah, this is car park number 1 at Ascot, and there's a waiting list of about 36 years for a car parking space, and sometimes they're handed down through generations, through trust funds and wills, and so having a wander around there, work up a thirst, you can see some interesting setups. The car boot picnic, it's quite a classic go-to image, I think, at occasions like this.
So before we go to I love this next set. We're going to talk about the Brits abroad, but before we go there, there's a couple of questions that have come in which we can tackle now. And John has asked, what would be a documentary project that you would like to do that you haven't done yet?
Yeah, I should know this, shouldn't I? But I kind of tend to. I've never photographed my hometown, because for 20 years I always thought never on your own doorstep. But I think that would be a challenge to do that. And I feel as though I want to do that because I acknowledge how it has shaped my career, and I'm grateful for it. So look out, Weymouth, Dorset. I may be spending more time there back with you than I ordinarily would. And most of the photographers I admire, and here I'm thinking of Tom Stoddard and Marcus Bleasdale and Brent Sturt, and the photographers do what I can't. So I always kind of wish that I could, document sort of the front line of, animal talk, sort of what Brent does, but they do it so well. I haven't got that kind of that eye, I guess. So yeah, maybe. Thank you for the question, John. It may be a disappointing answer, but I think it's time for me to go home and make sense of the town that bore me and shaped me through my formative years. Shoot local, I think.
Do you find that you're more inspired, perhaps, or you feel you might be when you're not in familiar territory at the same time? Because I personally, when I feel my eyes are more open to stuff when I'm not in my hometown. When I'm out of London or out of wherever, out of Boreham Wood where I live, I just feel like I personally observe more than I do because I guess it's less familiar. Do you find that? Is that maybe why you've not gone back and done the hometown project?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I say 50% of what I photograph is familiar, but then of course 50%, isn't. I never went to public school, posh school, and I never even, to my knowledge, came across a privately educated person until I was 18 and I left Weymouth. So, that fascination is still there. This is kind of going back to John's question. So, ever since 1995, I've tried to use photography to get me access to as many upper class institutions as I can to photograph in. So Eton College, Harrow, and there's a few events like Queen Charlotte's Ball that I haven't sort of managed to get my lens pointed at just yet. So that's always kind of on the back of my radar.
Because you're banned from those events. There's a large photo of you at the entrance to Eton with do not let this man in. Especially to this party.
It's a serious point, I guess, that photographers are being restricted. Events like Ascot and Aintree up for the Grand National are increasingly kind of dictating what kind of pictures they want taken at their event. So they're advising agencies not to send photographers like myself, I guess. So it's I wouldn't be surprised if my credentials or accreditation is denied.
Very sanitized. I think that's the problem. Everyone's a bit snowflakey and they're worried about it's the recourse of the social media. I think is possibly and everyone is trying to control their brand and how their brand's perceived, possibly, and it's like what happened last night when I was saying to you I was promoting this event and I stuck some pictures up on a group and the immediate reaction was these pictures are not appropriate, and I was like they're photographs, and the guy couldn't understand that just because it had a leg or a picture of a bottom or whatever it might be that's not the point of the photograph. And they very sort of blinkered and I'm sorry, but this is not acceptable to our group. And like, well, no one said anything. I think there's an element of maybe over paranoia about brand damage. I mean, I guess it's going to be worse as we start to get, ease back into society normally where the sort of level of paranoia is at an all-time high. But I certainly find I find that quite restrictive.
Yeah, I think influencers have more of a role that way. It's but I'm not going to stop taking photographs of what I see and what I understand as the truth, even if they don't get published for 5, 6, 7 years. I think we're in real danger of there being a visual void of what actually happened in the last decade because people are too terrified to take these kind of pictures, or they're prevented from taking them, or restricted, or for whatever reason. But I think in time they'll be valid. So I'm going to carry on.
A very nice segue. Very nice segue to I think one of my favourite sets that I've looked through for yours, which is the British abroad, because this is it's always been a fascinating part when I travel, not necessarily for holiday but for work, and end up in a place where it's swamped with Brits. So if you want to, talk us through this set, which I think was great.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is my third book on the English or the British, and the first time I ever went abroad was in 1986, and I went to Magaluf, Mallorca, with my mum, dad, and sister. The second time I ever went abroad was in 1989, and I went to Magaluf, Mallorca, with my friends Mark, Jason, and Stuart. So this kind of holiday was, where it all began, I guess, in combination with where I grew up. So I always felt as though I should end the triptych of work on the beaches with the young British at play. But it's something I should have done as a 42-year-old Rick. I'm 48 now, so I shot these when I was 42, I think, and I didn't blend as well as I thought I did.
No.
I think I did 36 days back to back, and I just remember lying on my bed in Mallorca, smelling of chip fat, listening to David Guetta for the 89th time, wondering why I hadn't shot this kind of reportage in my 20s. But it was a tombstone moment, that maybe I should sort of knock this kind of thing on the head. But if there's any commissioning editors out there listening, of course, I would snap on my speedos at a moment's notice and
God help us all.
Interesting.
Interesting. Good luck with that at the moment. The interesting there might be a market for the the sort of our generation of people that grew up in the real clubs, and the ecstasy generation, if you like, or whatever you want to call it. There's a title for you. So all these dads, that are just kind of clinging on to the little threads of their youth and go and visit Ibiza on their lads' night out and hoping it's going to all be the same.
Yeah, I'm clinging on to my wardrobe, that's for sure. But, I think you're right, and I always count myself lucky that I lived through rave, Britpop, football, terrace, casual culture. Within 10 years, that's 3 sort of youth cultures there and then. And I talked to my nephew, who I think is 28, and he had the Spice Girls. So it's. So I guess if I can impart some advice, why not? If anyone's still watching, is to shoot now what is relevant. If you're into religion or go-karting or rock, whatever, just photograph it now, because it will be relevant in 20 years' time. And I don't know of any one photographer who's got a significant archive of work from the rave scene. Tom Hunter's got some, Ewan Spencer's got some. And in the same with the football hooliganism, there's no real, that I know of, great sort of documentary from one photographer. There's images from various. So
I'm guessing there will be lots of images from people's smartphones, and there's probably lots of images at the moment where there is a concerted effort to document one specific thing. There'll be lots of crap everywhere because everyone's shooting lots of crap, but I guess that one sort of niche of focus is probably lacking.
But I never claim to have the definitive visual archive of anything, but it's my contribution, so I'll put it alongside Homer Sykes's and, other photographers who are doing their brilliant best to, document what they see. So, but this sounds very grand, but, I was always told by my agency director to try and create an anthropological legacy of a time that will be a go-to archive in 10, 20 years' time of something, something that you witnessed. And that's how I hope, keep generating sales.
So, which again leads us on, you kind of answered it, but do you think as you've got older, you've got wiser or better, or have you changed in terms of what you're trying to do as you've got older, or just become like me, incredibly bitter each year to the point where I just, as I'm social distancing for 25 years now, has been completely normal for me. So I don't know how you feel about it.
There was definitely a time when I kind of crept into my 40s and I kind of realized that my competitors weren't going away. Photography is a very competitive business, and necessarily so, And I kind of looked around and I thought, well, that photographer's still doing brilliant work. And so I actually got less bitter and, let the anger subside, and then decided to reach out and be more collaborative rather than competitive. So I think wiser, perhaps not, but certainly more accepting of, the admiring other people's craft and their contribution to photography. So, and I'm a father as well. That certainly now my daughter's kind of 15. There are certain pictures that I took while documenting the British abroad that, I might question if that scene was in front of me again. So, we have to change, don't we? It's a remarkable individual who can go through 48 years and not sort of swerve dramatically from one sort of personality to the next. So, yeah, I'm not bitter. I accept everybody else's greatness and my place on the ladder, wherever that might be.
You pulled out some pictures when I did ask you that question, which I'm going to pull back up here. When I said, "Have you got more bitter, or whatever? Have you got older?" For some reason, I think you almost like a knee-jerk reaction went to you pulled out a couple of these from the books abroad.
This was the moment when I realised that I didn't blend, because there's a YouTube video of this boat party, and the DJ's kind of up high. And he's panning the crowd, and the music's going, and then he gets to me and he sees me and he just goes, "Whoa, who's the old dude?" And then he forgets and he does it again. So when I saw that video and I saw myself crouched down among, these 20-year-olds in my head that I blended with, and visually I saw that I clearly didn't. And at the back of the image, you can see a dad with his daughter on her lap, they just, because it's a public boat ride that just got overtaken by a load of British reps. And I kind of looked at him, he looked at me, and we nodded that, while it was interesting to witness, we should, not by any means consider ourselves part of the party.
Very much an outsider, as I'm guessing.
A tombstone moment. Yeah.
As I guess you might have been here as well.
Yeah, I mean, these look like easy photographs to get, as though I just turned up and started snapping away. But, these resorts, Ayia Napa in particular, there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of drugs, there's a lot of, gangsters. So you can't just turn up and start photographing in nightclubs and pool parties. You can try, but so I made sure I had permissions by the people who ran the events and venues before I got out there, which just made things a whole lot easier for me to go about my business. So if I ever return to Ayia Napa, I'm assured that I've got a free pass to the water parks by the man who helped set me up. You have
the freedom of the city of Ayia Napa.
Let's just call him the Georgian and leave it there.
Because these are scenes which, oddly enough, are quite familiar, I think, to lots of people, which is something that, not that, I'm not, I went to Ibiza once actually last year. Again, I felt the same as you, it was very much as an outsider, and I've never been one for the sort of that culture, but there's a sort of familiarity about a lot of your work, but also a kind of, I can't know how to describe it, but also like, oh God, that kind of aspect, but we've all seen it. And in certain ways, but I think you kind of just have a knack of, pulling out. And we were talking about this one before, and you just know that lady has bought that wine box with absolutely no intention, I think, of ever pouring it into a glass. I think.
Yeah. What's the bottle of 7-Up or whatever fizzy drink? Is she tipping it in there? Is it lemonade? Is she making a spritzer?
It's probably full of. It's probably got tequila in it as well as the 7-Up, I'm guessing. So it's a sort of a tequila shots pre-mixed with a dry rosé chaser, maybe. And there's obviously a lady enjoying herself on the pneumatic bull.
It's a wet T-shirt competition.
Oh, was it?
In Magaluf.
Did you get involved with the competition? Did you don a T-shirt and ride the bull?
I kept out of that one. But that last picture of the guy jumping in, it's the book's called The British Abroad. So I spent a lot of time trying to, if I found someone passed out on the beach and I took a picture and I thought it was a good picture, I'd have to wait until they woke up. So I've got some great pictures of Danish people on the beach, but as soon as they wake up and I say, "Hello, I'm Peter Dench. How are you? Where are you from?" if they say Copenhagen, I go, great, damn, I can't use that picture because it's a book about the British abroad. So so something like that, guy dives off, I think that's a great picture, and then I'll have to run down to try and get him as he comes out of the water and just double check that he's from Wigan, which most of them seem to be.
There's a couple more that I want to flick up because I think they're just sum up lots of things. But we're going to move on to the whole lockdown situation in a minute. But I think this is I know I've got a fascination with that one. Wondering whether you asked him to do that. I'm guessing you didn't.
Absolutely not. No, it's Titan Bright Night in Poreč, Croatia, for this Welsh student who was studying at the University of Wales at the time. But again, with all my projects, you can't just make funny pictures. You have to have something, to say. And at the time I was shooting this, there were 7 fatalities from balcony falls, I think, in Magaluf alone that year. So, I didn't want to photograph, the chances of photographing an actual incident is pretty slim. So I visited various locations where people had fallen. I photographed a guy who'd broken both legs from a balcony fall, and yes.
There we go.
So this is Callum from the Outer Hebrides. I think he'd slipped on the floor of the apartment where he was staying, fell through a glass window off the balcony, and severed the tendons in both of his legs. But he was out the night before he was being flown home by his travel agency, having a cheeky glass. He was only 19, but he had travel insurance, so it cost him £14 or thereabouts. And if he hadn't had that, in order to get himself home, it would have cost potentially thousands of euros. So, it's trying to make entertaining pictures. Like you said in that brilliantly worded introduction, if you can make people laugh, make people think, and, have a few drinks along the way, that's not a bad way to spend your time. But this guy, he had flip-flops on in a nightclub. He trod on a glass, severed his foot. He didn't have insurance, so it would have cost him 400 euros to get treatment. So instead, him and his mates kind of just washed off his foot. I think the bandages are a do-it-yourself job. So, as well as trying to sort of disarm people with humour, you have to engage with some of these sort of serious matters going on. And this one kind of just summed it up for me. It's everything you need, really.
It literally is everything.
It's near the Benny Hill bar in Magaluf. So when I first went there with my mum and dad, the Coca-Cola aspect of a drink was more expensive than the Bacardi. So you'd get sort of, buy one, get 2 free. So I just remember as a 14-year-old sitting with my mum and dad, and I had something like 3 double Bacardis on the go. And when I woke up the following morning, my dad asked if I was all right, and I said yes. And I said, why? He said, well, we had to fish you out of the bath twice during the night. And when I went back to document the British abroad in Magaluf, I went to Benny Hill Bar, and I said, right, it's time to put the Bacardi issue to bed. And I ordered a double Bacardi and Coke, and it got as far as here, and just the smell, 28 years later, prevented me from downing it.
So no more Bacardi.
No more Bacardi.
Moving, sort of, never mind. I'm sure you could buy some and get some sort of rehabilitation from Bacardi if you wanted to. Obviously, lockdown is something that everyone's been talking about incessantly for the past few months. It's the sort of the point of the conversation where we turn to, and I've been asking all other guests as well, what have you been doing during lockdown? Are you able to maintain your creativity? Are you losing your mind? Is it frustrating, stifling? Are you suffocated by the lack of stuff to go and shoot?
Only this last week, I think for 6 weeks I managed to, despite the horror that's going on, we are witnessing history. And I live in central London. I'm able to walk to Downing Street if I need to, take an hour or so. But so I had this whole kind of area where things were changing day by day. Not dramatically, but shifts. And as a photojournalist, with a press pass, I can still, under the government guidelines, go about my business. So I've kind of been writing about it for various journals and photographing it. And a lot of us have been, the photographs that I've produced are quite predictable. But at the time, they were kind of exciting and fascinating, which doesn't mean they still shouldn't be taken. I think, again, if we can all document our situation in a year's time, it'll be a valuable contribution to our archive. And this is the only time my daughter has allowed me really to observe her through a camera. So, I kind of plundered that opportunity to make some memories, really. From that point of view, it's been quite an optimistic time and a privilege to have been in the company of my two girls and, being able to document where I can. Oh, I get so sentimental. Oh no, look at me. What's happened? I'll probably delete these in 6 months and pretend they never happened. I mean, I've seen inside more colleagues' houses and corners of rooms and shafts of light and unmade beds than I ever have before. And, I've gone through that whole process as well. But, why not? I mean, what was I thinking there? I drank tea in week 2. Disaster.
And in week 3, in 4 and 5 and 6, I guess. But yeah. But obviously, it's quite nice, I think, because again, we were chatting about this, that usually the only subject that I used to get to take pictures of was the pet cat, but now you've got time to be with your family and to actually sort of almost like watch them in their habitat, which I guess you wouldn't have done much before. But would you actually, like, if your daughter said, "You know what, Dad, I really want to get into photography," what would you advise her on? Say that, do not do that. It's a nightmare. Would you actually give her the thumbs up, the DENCH approval?
Well, of course, I couldn't tell her not to pursue that because it's delivered me such a satisfying life. The highs are high, the lows are low. There's rarely any middle ground, but middle ground is a desk job, I guess. I always knew from the very start if I was going to be able to see the up Bournemouth. If I was able to see I miss my away days. If I was ever to see the world, it would have to be at someone else's expense. I've always understood that. I've got no trust fund and no savings and no knowledge of how to excel in that area. So, for me, it's been a very satisfying choice of, career. And, we've had to diversify every few years in this industry, but it's for me, it's incredibly exciting. So if she did ask the question, I'd do everything I can to encourage her and, guide her in the right directions and being aware of what she's getting into. I had to interrupt my research on man boobs to moobs to listen to the Queen's speech there.
Of course. But it's interesting, even with the Queen's speech thing, and it dawned on me when it was on, and also these sort of press conferences, it's a time that when have we ever sat down in recent years in front of the telly like there was no other type of media? So whether we watch it on the streaming or whatever, everything's always catch up, so when I can't remember the last time that I sat with any members of my family at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, whatever, and you go, right, and everything went quiet, and it was like, we're going to hear what Boris has got to say, we're going to hear what the Queen's got to say. And I think that's a phenomenal part of history, that we've not done that probably since the war. Actually sat down and wanted to listen to what the leaders or our leaders have got to say. It's an absolute, it's a weird fascination that we've all got to, we could watch it on our phones, but at that time we have to watch it live because it's something we need to know now with all, all this sort of pervasive media that we've got and everything that's, be able to watch this show within seconds of me pressing finish. It'll be on catch up and replay on all the different channels. But yet, the Queen and whenever, you know, they're live and it's immediate. And so I think we're living through an incredibly exciting time, but frightening at the same time, possibly.
Don't be scared, Rick.
You're right there.
Survive.
I'll get back to your pictures while you burp, shall I? But I think it's fascinating, you know, and the whole sort of grammar of you know, the Zoom and the lockdown, and it's just been a thing, and which you've, of course, have you finished burping now? I'll cut back to you.
Yes. Sorry.
You know, and
I've
I've got
run out of Nexium. So,
and the commission for Getty, with which stuff you sent me over, which was to document. What was the specific brief? Was it just to document lockdown London, or just how life has changed? What was their
well, yeah, I mean, of course, Getty are covering everything, you know, and rightly so. So every week, their sales team, you know, sometimes have the same pool of material to put out there. So I was just asked by my editor at Getty to try and utilise, you know, my style, which is bold and bright, and concentrate on, you know, these colours and the tape and the lack of people that was happening around London. So I think this sequence, there's no signs of life, you know, which was fascinating for me to do. And you know, at times you could sit in central London for 5 minutes and not see anyone, and just, you know, hear the wildlife. And you know, these are moments that you know, I will sort of reach back to, you know, as we go forward. So yeah, it was just trying to make something visually interesting from, you know, in these times of confinement and lockdown, while being denied the usual events that they send me to, or that I go to under my own esteem. But I quite like being in, you know, photographing boring things. It teaches you to look a lot harder, or a lot differently at something. You know, it's a different way of working. But hopefully, if we have some viewers, they're finding it interesting. And you know, something like this, where the bus drivers are being protected, and you know, hopefully will have value in 5-10 years time, that we can look back on and go, oh yeah, you know, my mum wondered what happened to the tape. Where's it all going to go? You know, is it going to be collected and recycled?
End up in trees, probably somewhere. We have got a few questions actually before we wrap up. And Simon says, I have a copy of the DENCH'S Dozen, a great book, but which photographer do you take the most inspiration from?
Oh, Simon, how could you pose such a question? Well, of course, on the record, I take equal amount of inspiration from all of them. A lot of them were friends, so I knew them quite well. So Marcus Bleasdale, Tom Stoddard. But some of the photographers I hadn't met before. So I guess it's those photographers that I kind of got more from. So, you know, I went to see Homer Sykes, and I had two questions I wanted to ask him. One was, is anyone photographing Britain now in a way in which you admire? He said no. So I thought, okay, well, that's that then. And then the second question was, did he have a certain book that I'd been trying to locate for a long, long time, which he did. So I gave him a post-dated check. So it's moments like that, you know, just being in a hero's home, and seeing what's on their walls, under the bed, in the fridge, for me is kind of as inspiring as sort of flicking through their books. So yeah, I'd go with you know, Homer Sykes from that particular collection, with no disrespect to all of the other people that I interviewed.
We've got another one, another question here from Martin. He says, your pictures are mostly, and he's put it in inverted commas, funny. Do you think that you could sway people's view of the past when they look at them in years to come?
Tricky question. I think humour is an important tool in photography, but it's difficult to get right. But if you can make people laugh or disarm them with a humorous picture, and then later on in the sequence, if there is a photograph from an A&E ward or of a fatality, I think, you know, when you bounce those two sort of pictures off each other, the impact is tenfold. So, I think, it's difficult to know how or if anyone will care about my work in the future. But I'd like to think now it might have the potential to effect some change on a very small level. And if humour helps deliver that message, in a slightly different way, then I think that's a good thing. Challenge.
And the last question that's on the official questions list that have come up. Why have you chosen? We're going to go back to those the monochrome pictures of your wife and daughter at home. Why have you chosen to put the lockdown image into monochrome when the other series are such vibrant in colour? That's from Hilary.
Thank you, Hilary. Isn't that genius? So, yeah, I mean, I thought it was when I had the idea, but on reflection, so I just decided to, everything inside would be in black and white with my family, and everything outside, would be in colour, like the Wizard of Oz film, I guess, how it transgresses. But it also takes away the problem of colour. I think it's more difficult to take a successful colour photograph than it is a successful black and white photograph. And the property in which I live hasn't had much sort of thought go into the interior decor. So all the walls are just a beige, and that was getting on my nerves slightly. And the photos look so much better in black and white. I thought I'd go that route. But I think it works. If you look on my website, they're all interspersed. And I think when you transition from outside in the colour to inside in black and white, it works. Whether that will continue, I don't know.
I'm just reading through some of the questions. I'm not quite sure why there's been a few buffering issues. I don't know whether that's because America's waking up and going online, but I'm sorry if that's happened to you all, but I think it's all sorted now. But there's a few comments have come here, and we've had that's hilarious. I'm not entirely sure what that was related to. And Graham wrote, "I'm fairly new to Peter's work, but these pics are amazing, LOL." So I guess that's what the kids say now. Would and Hilary has written again, would like to see that, and also a follow up on the college place, Bournemouth and Poole. So there's some interest in that as a series. And Kathy wrote, Weybetha, in brackets Weymouth, in the summer is worth doing. Very quiet at the moment. Well, I'm guessing it would be, but that sounds as ominously called Weybetha.
Well, I worked in the joke shop in Weymouth for 3 years, and it was opposite the train station. So you'd have the train depositing Bristolians and Brummies during factory shutdown for their sort of annual holiday, and they'd come over to the joke shop and they'd buy heavy drinker hats and stick cans to the side and a tube in their mouth, or boob inspector hats or damn seagull hats or kiss me quick, whatever. So it was quite a violent yet fun place for a teenage boy to grow up. There was a Navy base as well, which added another dimension to the nightclubs at the weekends. So it was quite volatile, and Weybetha, thank you. I'm gonna maybe take that title.
So
Weybetha.
As we sort of round up, do you have any regrets?
Well, every second of every day, pretty much. Yeah, always. Everything. I didn't do enough job. I only remember the pictures I didn't take, situations I didn't sort of maximise. But then, I figure it's half time in my career. 20 years. It's 3-all. I've no idea if it's going to end 3-6, 6-3, 6-all. But so far, it's been a good game and an entertaining half. So, bring on the next 20 years and we'll see what happens.
So on that, are you, in these viral times, are you actually worried about the virus personally? I mean, if, in terms of, we were chatting about this gathering that's happening possibly in Hyde Park, and, are you, I guess it's not, I don't want to get into the whole "are you afraid to die" question, but are you actually frightened? Would I guess would the idea or the thought of this catching this and the unknown of what it might or may not do to you, is that stopping you doing your work?
That's a bit deep, Rick.
Sorry.
I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid to live.
Well, I just think, because I keep hearing, stop being afraid of it. It's going to be around for a while. You need to just, live a little more and not be so frightened. And some people are saying, no, you've got to stay in. And so, I mean, where do you sit on the whole personally? Are you personally, are you frightened of the virus as a thing?
No, the only thing that I'm frightened of is it impacting my daughter's education and development. Hopefully we'll look back, fondly is the wrong term, but a lot of horror has happened, but look back, I had HIV when I was her age, and the threat of nuclear war, so that was quite defining as well. And so my only fear is that this sort of impacts negatively on her. But it's in terms of going about my job as a photojournalist, I'm doing it within the recommendations and have no concerns about my own personal safety. Obviously I don't want to bring it back to my house, but I need to do what I feel is what I've always done, which is document what I'm living through. And
on that note, do you have any final words of wisdom?
I think everyone's had enough, don't you, Rick?
I think it's time to crack open that second can. Well, it's been about an hour, and apart from me pressing the wrong button at the start, I think it's been a hoot. So
trust your instincts, shoot what matters to you, and hopefully there'll be an audience for it. That's what I always try and hold on to myself. So, good luck.
Yeah,
stay safe.
And indeed, and thanks so much for taking time out from whatever you were doing at the start of the day to what you're doing now and to what you might do in the next hour. I'm getting the feeling it might be the same as what it was yesterday.
It's clappy. It's clap night.
Oh, it's clap night. Well, you've got to be careful how you phrase that around certain parts, to be fair. Mind you, in Ibiza, that was probably a theme of one of the evenings. It went Thursday night's clap night. So,
no, we shall gather at the window, and it might be the last one. Who knows? Hopefully it'll continue in some way. But if there's a nice sundown, I might get out on my street, and it almost feels like closure today somehow. We shall see.
Hey, well, Peter, listen, thanks so much. Stay safe. Take care. And hopefully we'll see you bright and breezy at some gathering at some point in the future. And we look forward to it, I'm sure. But thank you to everyone for joining us. Thanks, Peter. And on that note, I guess they say roll VT.
You should not go out. Stay at home. Start working from home. Stop non-essential contact. Protect our NHS. Stay at home. And save lives.